Black carts rattled over the basalt paving stones of the Appian Way, their wooden wheels groaning under an impossible burden. It was the year 165, and a suffocating dread had descended upon the capital of the world. The smell of burning myrrh and rotting flesh hung thick in the humid air, masking the usual aromas of baking bread and bustling markets. This was not a barbarian invasion, nor a political coup, but an invisible, devastating pandemic that would soon be known as the Antonine Plague. The Roman Empire, at the absolute zenith of its territorial might and cultural influence, was suddenly fighting for its very survival against an enemy it could not see, could not stab, and could not conquer. The contagion had hitched a ride on the ultimate vector of Roman supremacy. Following a highly successful campaign against the Parthian Empire in the east, the victorious legionaries of co-emperor Lucius Verus marched westward, bringing the spoils of war back to the heartland. But nestled within their ranks, hidden in their lungs and festering in their blood, was a microscopic terror. As these legions dispersed to their garrisons across Gaul, Britannia, and the Rhine, they unknowingly seeded the disease along the vast interconnected arteries of the empire. What began as a localized outbreak in a besieged Mesopotamian city rapidly metastasized into a continental catastrophe. Watching this unparalleled disaster unfold from the Palatine Hill was Marcus Aurelius. He was a man who had never truly desired the purple toga of absolute power, preferring the quiet contemplation of philosophy to the bloody realities of statecraft. Yet destiny had thrust him into the role of Roman emperor during one of its most turbulent epochs. He was now facing a crisis that no amount of military strategy or senatorial decree could easily solve. The weight of millions of lives pressed down upon his shoulders, demanding a leadership that transcended mere administration. The physician Galen, a brilliant Greek medical mind serving the imperial court, documented the gruesome reality of the affliction. He recorded victims suffering from fever, extreme thirst, and a horrific black pustular rash that erupted across their bodies. Those afflicted would cough up blood, their digestive tracts ravaged by ulcerations. Modern epidemiologists suspect this was an ancestral strain of smallpox, a virgin soil epidemic striking a population with absolutely zero natural immunity. The mortality rate was staggering, wiping out an estimated 10 to 20% of the empire's population. Leaving no social sling forums grew eerily quiet, trade networks fractured, and the fertile agricultural estates of the Italian countryside lay fallow as the enslaved workforce perished in droves. The beating heart of the ancient world was experiencing a profound systemic heart attack. In the face of this apocalyptic scenario, Marcus Aurelius turned inward, grounding himself in the rigorous discipline of Stoicism. This ancient Hellenistic philosophy taught that while we cannot control external events, we possess absolute sovereignty over our own reactions to them. He needed something profound to help him navigate the darkness. In the quiet hours of the night, while his city wept, the emperor began to write. He penned a series of personal reflections, never intended for publication, which we now know as the Meditations. These writings were not theoretical treatises, but a psychological survival manual. The political fallout of the contagion was immediate and severe, triggering a massive imperial crisis. The Roman Senate, usually a hotbed of ambition and fierce debate, was paralyzed by fear and dwindling numbers. Tax revenues plummeted as the labor force evaporated, starving the imperial treasury precisely when funds were most desperately needed. Whispers of divine punishment echoed through the marble halls, with opportunistic politicians and terrified citizens alike demanding scapegoats. The delicate balance of the Principate, the facade of a restored republic masking autocratic rule, threatened to shatter completely under the immense socio-economic strain. This internal weakness did not go unnoticed beyond the frontiers. Along the treacherous, freezing banks of the Danube River, a massive confederation of Germanic tribes, led by the fierce Marcomanni, sensed the empire's vulnerability. Roman border forts, severely depopulated by the plague, were suddenly facing overwhelming numerical superiority. The legions, the invincible iron fist of Rome, were severely depleted, their ranks thinned not by enemy swords but by the relentless fever. The empire was simultaneously bleeding from within and facing a massive hemorrhage on its northern borders. To finance the defense of the realm in the face of economic ruin, Marcus Aurelius executed an unprecedented maneuver. He ordered the imperial treasures to be hauled into the Forum of Trajan and auctioned off to the highest bidder. Gold goblets, silken robes belonging to the empress, exquisite statues, and priceless jewels were sold to wealthy citizens to raise funds for the war effort. It was a stunning display of civic duty and a stark admission of the empire's dire financial strait. The emperor was liquidating the physical manifestations of his own power to ensure the survival of the state. The tragedy soon struck at the very apex of Roman leadership. In the winter of 169, while traveling back to Rome from the northern front, co-emperor Lucius Verus suffered a sudden fatal stroke, though many whispered that the plague had finally claimed him. Marcus was now the sole ruler of a fractured, grieving empire. The shared burden of command was gone, leaving him entirely alone to navigate the dual nightmares of a relentless pandemic and a massive barbarian invasion. The philosophical thinker was forced to become a full-time warlord. The reality of the northern campaign was a grim exercise in endurance. The Roman military camps, usually models of pristine engineering and rigorous discipline, were transformed into sprawling, muddy hospices. Soldiers huddled around smoky fires, shivering from both the biting European cold and the lingering chills of the contagion. Marcus lived among them, refusing the comforts of the capital to share the miserable rations and the constant, gnawing fear of sudden death. He walked the lines, a stooped but unyielding figure, offering what little comfort a mortal emperor could provide to dying men. It was in these bleak, frost-bitten encampments, particularly at Carnuntum along the Danube, that the most profound passages of his meditations were forged. By the flickering light of an oil lamp wrapped in heavy wool against the damp chill, Marcus wrestled with his own despair. He wrote of the fleeting nature of fame, the inevitability of death, and the paramount importance of duty. The physical act of writing became a daily spiritual exercise, a method of scraping away the terrifying realities of his environment to find an indestructible core of inner peace. His writings reveal a profound application of the Stoic concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate. Marcus argued that to resent the plague, to curse the invading armies, or to weep over lost wealth, was to fight against the rational order of the universe. Accept the things to which fate binds you, he wrote, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart. This was not passive resignation, but a fiercely active acceptance. It was a philosophical armor that allowed him to command armies and govern a dying population without succumbing to paralyzing grief. This intellectual armor was continually tested by agonizing personal losses. The personal struggle of the emperor and his wife, Faustina, involved the unimaginable heartbreak of burying child after child. Of their 14 children, only a handful survived to adulthood. While the exact causes of their deaths are lost to history, the omnipresent shadow of the Antonine Plague undoubtedly contributed to the staggering infant mortality of the imperial household. Marcus was a man who commanded legions and shaped the destiny of millions, yet he was utterly powerless to save his own flesh and blood from the grave. Despite the staggering death toll, the sheer bureaucratic and cultural momentum of Rome allowed for a grim adaptation. To replenish the decimated legions, Marcus was forced to implement drastic recruitment measures. He conscripted gladiators, freeing them from the blood-soaked sands of the arenas to fight on the frontiers. He armed slaves and bandits, offering freedom and pardons in exchange for military service. The strict social hierarchies of the ancient world were temporarily bent by the absolute necessity of survival. The empire was cannibalizing its own cultural institutions just to keep the barbarians at bay. The military situation reached its terrifying climax when the Marcomanni and their allies smashed through the Alpine passes, invading northern Italy itself. Not since the days of the Republic had a foreign army posed such a direct existential threat to the Italian peninsula. They laid siege to the vital city of Aquileia, sending shockwaves of panic all the way down to Rome. The psychological barrier of invincibility that had protected the heartland for centuries was shattered. The plague had weakened the gates, and now the wolves were inside the house. In this moment of supreme crisis, the true value of Marcus's Stoic training became undeniably evident. He did not panic, he did not flee, and he did not seek scapegoats. Instead, he methodically organized a counter-offensive, rallying the disparate, plague-weary remnants of his forces. His steady, unshakable demeanor became the anchor for a terrified populace. The emperor's quest for inner tranquility translated directly into a stabilizing political force. He embodied the ancient Roman virtue of constantia, a steadfastness of mind in the face of overwhelming adversity. The ensuing Marcomannic Wars were brutal, protracted, and fought in unforgiving terrain. During one particularly desperate engagement, a Roman legion was surrounded, cut off from their water supply, and baking under a relentless sun. Just as thirst and enemy archers were about to obliterate them, a sudden violent thunderstorm erupted. The torrential rain revived the dying Romans, while lightning strikes reportedly panicked the enemy forces. This event, immortalized as the miracle of the rain, was quickly seized upon by imperial propagandists, providing a desperately needed psychological victory for the exhausted troops. Yet, just as the military situation began to stabilize, the invisible enemy returned. The pandemic was not a single devastating event, but a rolling nightmare of successive waves. Just as communities began to recover and rebuild, the infection would flare up again, culling those who had managed to escape the initial outbreak. The psychological toll of this relentless cycle was immense, fostering a pervasive sense of fatalism across the provinces. The golden age of the Pax Romana was definitively over, replaced by an era of perpetual anxiety and survival. The decades of constant warfare, profound grief, and the sheer administrative burden of ruling a traumatized empire rapidly aged the philosopher king. His physical health, never particularly robust, began to fail under the crushing weight of his duties. He relied increasingly on a daily dose of theriac, an ancient opium-laced medicine prescribed by Galen, to manage his chronic pain and stomach ailments. The man who had written so eloquently about the fleeting nature of human existence was now intimately experiencing the slow, painful dissolution of his own body. In the spring of 180, in the military camp of Vindobona near modern-day Vienna, the end finally came. Surrounded by his weary generals and his surviving son, Commodus Marcus Aurelius succumbed to illness, quite possibly a final victim of the very plague he had fought so hard to outlast. As the historian Cassius Dio recorded, his death marked a tragic turning point, a descent from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. The passing of the last of the 5 good emperors left a profound vacuum in the Roman world. The legacy of the Antonine Plague was a permanently altered civilization. The massive demographic collapse fundamentally restructured the Roman economy, leading to inflation, increased taxation, and the gradual enserfment of the agricultural class. It fundamentally weakened the empire's military capacity, forcing a greater reliance on barbarian mercenaries that would eventually prove fatal centuries later. The trauma of the pandemic also accelerated profound spiritual shifts, paving the way for the rise of new mystery cults and, eventually, the sweeping triumph of Christianity as desperate citizens sought salvation beyond the mortal realm. Yet, amidst the ashes of this demographic catastrophe, a different kind of legacy endured. The private diary of a dying emperor, written in blood-soaked mud and freezing tents, survived the collapse of the empire itself. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius remain one of the most profound and widely read philosophical texts in human history. They stand as a timeless testament to human resilience, a powerful reminder that even when facing the collapse of the known world, a person can still choose to cultivate virtue, maintain their dignity, and conquer the empire within.